Hello, everyone. Welcome to Nightmare Nexus, where the darkness comes alive with spine-chilling stories and eerie tales that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Before beginning, please hit the subscribe button to never miss out on new stories. We have launched a new ebook named Whispers in the Dark, 110 Tales of Terror. In this ebook, you will find 110 short, spine-chilling horror stories. The book link is given in the description box. Go and check it out. Today we will present 3 disturbing true deep woods horror stories. Our first story is The Whispering Trees, a true deep woods horror story that will haunt you forever. So, without further ado, let's get started. It was supposed to be a weekend getaway, a chance to disconnect from the chaos of city life and reconnect with nature. 4 friends, armed with backpacks, tents, and a map, set out into the dense, uncharted woods of the Pacific Northwest. The forest was ancient, with towering pines that seemed to scrape the sky and a silence so profound it felt alive. The first day was uneventful. They hiked for hours, following a faint trail that promised a secluded campsite by a crystal-clear lake. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, the woods began to change. The air grew colder, and the silence was replaced by an eerie, almost imperceptible hum, like the sound of distant whispers carried on the wind. By nightfall, the group had set up camp. They laughed around the fire, trying to shake off the unease that had settled over them. But as the flames flickered and died, the whispers grew louder. At first, they thought it was their imagination, but soon it became undeniable. The voices were soft, unintelligible, and seemed to come from every direction at once. One of the friends, Sarah, swore she saw movement in the trees, a shadowy figure that darted between the trunks, just out of sight. The others dismissed it as fatigue, but the tension was palpable. They retreated to their tents, hoping the morning would bring clarity. It didn't. When they awoke, the map was gone. So was their compass. The trail they had followed the day before seemed to have vanished, replaced by an endless sea of identical trees. Panic set in as they realized they were lost. The whispers returned that night, louder this time. They spoke in a language none of them could understand, but the tone was unmistakable, mocking, almost gleeful. Then came the footsteps, slow, deliberate, and circling their camp. By the third day, the group was desperate. They split up to search for help, but only 3 returned. Sarah was gone. Her tent was shredded, as if something had clawed its way in, and her screams still echoed in their minds. The survivors stumbled out of the woods days later, battered and traumatized. They told their story to the authorities, but no trace of Sarah was ever found. The forest, they said, had swallowed her whole. To this day, hikers report hearing whispers in those woods. Some claim to see shadowy figures watching them from the trees. Others never return at all. The forest is alive, and it's hungry. Before beginning the second story, please hit the subscribe button if you haven't done so. Our second story is The Vanishing Trail, a true deep woods horror story that will leave you terrified. It started as a solo hiking trip, a chance for Mark to clear his head and escape the stress of his daily life. He chose a remote trail deep in the Appalachian Mountains, a place known for its rugged beauty and isolation. The trail was poorly marked, but Mark was an experienced hiker. He packed light, a tent, some food, a flashlight, and a camera to document his journey. The first day was peaceful. The forest was quiet, save for the occasional chirp of birds and the rustle of leaves in the wind. Mark set up camp as the sun began to set, enjoying the solitude. But as darkness fell, the atmosphere shifted. It began with the sounds. At first, Mark thought it was an animal, a deer maybe, or a raccoon. But the footsteps were too deliberate, too heavy. They circled his camp, just out of sight, stopping whenever he shone his flashlight into the trees. Then came the markings. The next morning, Mark noticed strange symbols carved into the bark of nearby trees. They were crude but deliberate, forming patterns that made no sense. He took photos, thinking they might be some kind of trail markers, but the deeper he hiked, the more they appeared. And they were fresh. By the second night, Mark's unease had turned to fear. The footsteps returned, louder this time, accompanied by a low, guttural growl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. He tried to convince himself it was just his imagination, but the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. On the third day, Mark decided to turn back, but the trail was gone. The path he had followed so carefully was now a labyrinth of identical trees and underbrush. His compass spun wildly, and his GPS showed nothing but static. Panic set in as he realized he was lost. That night, the growling grew louder. Mark huddled in his tent, clutching his flashlight like a weapon. Around midnight, he heard something outside, a voice, faint and distorted, whispering his name. He froze, too terrified to move. The next morning, Mark's tent was slashed open. His backpack was gone, along with most of his supplies. The only thing left was his camera, which had been placed neatly outside the tent. When he checked it, he found a series of photos he didn't remember taking. They showed shadowy figures standing among the trees, their eyes glowing faintly in the dark. The last photo was of Mark, asleep in his tent, with a hand reaching in from the edge of the frame. Mark ran. He didn't stop until he collapsed on the side of a road miles from where he had started. Rescuers found him days later, dehydrated and delirious. He told them about the trail, the markings, the figures. But no one believed him. The trail he had hiked was never found. Before beginning the third story, please hit the subscribe button if you haven't done so. Our third story is The Vanishing Trail, The Hollow Man, a true deep woods horror story that will keep you awake at night. It was supposed to be a fun weekend camping trip. 5 friends, Emma, Jake, Mia, Ryan, and Chris, headed into the dense, uncharted woods of the Black Hills, seeking adventure and a break from their busy lives. The forest was vast and eerily quiet, with towering trees that seemed to close in around them as they hiked deeper. The first night was uneventful. They set up camp, cooked dinner over a fire, and shared stories under the stars. But as the fire died down, the forest came alive with strange noises. It started with a faint tapping, like a branch knocking against a tree. Then came the whispers, soft, indistinct, and coming from all directions. The group tried to laugh it off, but the tension was palpable. Around midnight, they heard something that made their blood run cold, a low, guttural laugh echoing through the trees. It was close, too close. The next morning, they discovered something that made their unease turn to outright fear. Just outside their campsite, etched into the dirt, was a perfect circle of symbols. They looked ancient, almost ritualistic, and none of them had any idea how they got there. That night, the noises returned, louder and more menacing. The tapping became a rhythmic pounding, and the whispers turned into garbled voices. Then, around 2 a.m., they saw him. He stood at the edge of the firelight just beyond the trees. Tall and impossibly thin, his body seemed to shimmer, as if he weren't entirely solid. His face was featureless, smooth and hollow like a mannequin's. The big group froze, too terrified to move. The Hollow Man, as they later called him, didn't approach. He just stood there, tilting his head as if studying them. Then, without warning, he let out a bone-chilling scream that echoed through the forest. The campers fled, abandoning their tents and supplies. They ran for hours, guided only by the faint light of the moon. When they finally stumbled out of the woods, they were miles from where they had started. The authorities searched the area but found no trace of the Hollow Man or the strange symbols. To this day, the friends refuse to talk about what happened in those woods. But one thing is certain: the Hollow Man is still out there, waiting for the next group of campers to wander too far into his domain. Thanks for joining us on this terrifying journey through some of the most disturbing camping encounters ever told. These stories remind us that the wilderness, while beautiful, can also hide unspeakable horrors. Whether it's whispers in the woods, shadows that move on their own, or campsites that shouldn't exist, one thing is clear: some places are better left unexplored. If you've ever had a creepy camping experience, let us know in the comments below. We'd love to hear your stories. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more spine-chilling tales. And remember, next time you're out in the wild, keep your eyes open, your wits about you, and maybe stay close to the fire. Until next time, stay safe and stay out of the shadows. Last but not the least, before leaving, please check out the horror story ebook. Link in the description. Goodbye, and see you in the next one. Good night.